So welcome to the McCarthy Observatory and our second Saturday Stars program for the new year. I'm Monty Robson, the director of the observatory, and tonight we'll talk about Tycho and Uraniborg, which was astronomy just before the telescope. And I'll go through it fairly quickly, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Okay. So the story is going to take us back about 450 years into the past and about 4,000 miles northeast of here. To there. To Uraniborg, on the Danish island of Ven, which is now the Swedish island of Ven. 2.5 miles long, 1.5 miles wide, population about 350 today. That's a Google image of it, taken last year on the right, and one of Tycho's maps of it in 1598. The observatory is right in the center, at the highest spot, which is 44 meters above the sea. There's a nice picture from a commercial airliner by Bjorn Christian Thornson from a year and a half ago. Now, so I'm not a linguist, so my pronunciation is going to be Americanized. Anyway, Uraniborg was named after Urania, the daughter of Zeus and the goddess of music, song, and dance, and the muse of astronomy. Uraniborg was the observatory home of Tycho Brahe, that's Americanized, the world's greatest astronomer before the invention of the telescope. And there he is, Tycho Brahe, from December 14th, 1546 to October 24th, 1601. A nobleman, an astronomer. Also, let me say that all the dates you're going to get are old style. Denmark did not switch over to the Gregorian calendar until 1700. Some of you will be asked this later. Anyway, there's Tycho. The inscription below him is, this is a statue of Tycho Brahe, son of Otto, Danish lord of the Knudstrup Castle and of Uraniborg Observatory on the island of Ven in the Danish Sound, inventor of astronomical equipment and structures at the age of 40. The observatory was completed in 1586. So that's what Tycho looked like when he was 40. So the best primary sources of information on Tycho, Pierre Gassendi. He wore so many hats, I can't, we could spend the whole thing just talking about Gassendi. He's an astronomer, a mathematician, a philosopher, a Catholic priest. He wrote the first biography on Tycho in 1654. He was also the first to ever view a transit. A transit of the inner planets is when you can see them going across the face of the sun. They're not everyday occurrences. It happens to Mercury about, on average, 11 times a century. And transits of Venus are even rarer. They come in pairs 8 years apart, We had one in 2004 and another one in 2012. The 2004 one was perfect for us, crystal clear. The one in 2012 we only saw glimpses of every now and again when the clouds would part. But they're the rarest of predictable solar system events. So they come in pairs, 8 years apart, and then they're separated by either 108 years or 120 years. So the one in 2004, there was no one alive that had ever seen one. It's been 120 years. And just a month or two before it happened, they claimed that the oldest person in the world, who was a French man, I think he was about 110 as I recall, had died. So anyway, the other good source is John Louis Emile Dreyer, who was a Danish-British astronomer. He published a set of all of Tycho's works in a 15-volume set beginning in 1913, and it continued. The 15th volume came out in 1928, which is just after he passed away. He also compiled the NGC, which is the new general catalog of all of Herschel's discoveries. And he worked at that telescope there that was in Ireland. At the time, it was the largest telescope in the world. It was the largest telescope in the world until 1917, when the 100-inch at Mount Wilson in California came online. But this is a 6-foot reflecting telescope in Ireland. The other good source is John Christensen. He's a history professor in the U.S. and a writer. He was dubbed Knight of the Royal Norwegian Order of Merit by King Harald in 1995. And one of his papers, Tycho Brahe's Facts of Life, was published in 1970 in, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but what it means, it translates to Findings and Research, which is a first-class scientific journal from the Royal Library of Denmark. So let's take a look. So this is and another thing, all writing back then was in Latin, unless you were writing a love letter to your girlfriend and she was from the same country you were from. But anything for a wider audience was Latin. Today, we're lucky, at least I think I am, that English is the international language. See, I was an airline pilot before, and all the international controllers around the world are required to speak English. Sometimes it's just barely English. Sometimes it's not English at all. But anyway, at least I didn't have to learn French for my livelihood. Anyway, I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to translate it and read it to you. This is from a guy named Stefan Johannes, who was a history professor and the royal historian of Denmark. He wrote it on May 3rd, 1648. It was found in the Royal Library by Professor Christensen, who thinks the only source of this information that Johannes wrote could have been Tycho's horoscope of himself. So this is a primary source. It says, from the MS Annals of my late father, M. Johannes Stephanus, Tycho Brahe Ottensen, a man of noble family, excelling in a variety of scientific studies, and easily the chief mathematician of his generation, was born December 14th, 10:47 a.m. in the year of our Lord, 1546, under the elevation of the pole, 56 degrees. What? Here's a Google image of Lutstrup Castle. Here's latitude, 55.979. 55.98. That's pretty close to 56, isn't it? That's what I meant. That's where Tycho was born. Here's a picture of what it looks like today. Tycho's birth name in Danish was...
I can say it for you. It's Tuga. Tuga.
Tuga?
Tuga. I don't know how to say his last name, but it's Tuga.
I think...
I met a guy named Tuga.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay. In Danish, I think it's Brahe. But there's differences. German's a little different. His Latinized name, which is the Tycho, that's where that comes from, it's his Latinized name. But they're all just a little bit different, but Americanized as Tycho Brahe. Anyway. So he was nobility, no question. All four of his great-grandfathers and both of his grandfathers were in the Rigsdag, which is the Council of the Realm. And they played a big part in Danish history. On his father's side, the Brahes, they were all basically military types. And the maternal side of that, they were smarter and administrators and stuff. Anyway, his birth parents were Otto Brahe and Beatty Billy. But look, so if you remember, it was his name, and so many of the northern European names, they say they give your name, your given name, then your surname, and then who's your father. So it was Ottoson, right, for him? Like the Prime Minister of Iceland now is a gal, and she's something or other daughter. So that's the way they do it in Northern Europe. They give your given name, your family name, and then who was your dad. Do that in Russia too. Anyway, it's pretty neat. So when Tycho was about 2.5 years old, he was kidnapped by his uncle Jørgen Brahe and raised by him and his wife Inger Ox as their son. The story is that Jørgen took Tycho along on an elk hunt, and Tycho found an elk calf alone by itself, and so they took it home and Tycho raised it. We'll talk about the elk a little bit later. And this, Tycho had a superb education. Here are the universities he attended. That's not the dates he attended. That's the date that they were founded. So some pretty old schools there. Anyway, I'll read this to you. It says, he came to Copenhagen to study on April 19th, 1559. He left Copenhagen February 14th, 1562. He came to Leipzig on March 24th, 1562. He left Leipzig May 17th, 1565. He came to Rostock on May 25th, 1565. He returned to Wittenberg on April 15th, 1566, from his fatherland. Leaving there September 16th, he came to Rostock September 24th, fleeing on account of the plague. So they had to be concerned about the plague. Now, this will read, it says, in the year 1566, on December 10th, his dispute first arose with Mandrup Parsberg concerning the movement of the stars, when both were present at a betrothal in Lucas Bachmeister's residence. It was resumed on the 27th on the occasion of the Christmas festivities. Finally, on the 29th, it came to a duel. In this conflict, Mandrup inflicted a serious wound on Tycho's nose. Thus he lost almost the whole front of his nose, part of which was utterly cut off. This happened about 7 o'clock in the evening in thick darkness. So, we've got a great group of volunteers here. We get along fine, but every now and again we might have a little dispute about something, but we never go outside with swords. So there were a little bit different days back then. In 1571, Tycho fell in love with a commoner, Kirsten Jorgensdatter, daughter of Jørgen Hansen, Jorgensdatter, the Lutheran minister in Knudstrup. They could not marry in a normal way because Tycho would have lost his noble status. But after 3 years of togetherness, they were considered lawfully married. That was a morgantic laws that there could be an exception. And that way, Tycho remained a noble, but any children would be considered commoners. So Tycho and Kirsten had 6 children that became adults. This is the title page of Tycho's book on the 1572 supernova, and it translates to concerning the star, new and never before seen in the life or memory of anyone. So last November 11th was the 447th anniversary of the first observation of the supernova. The supernova is a star, a massive star that, for one reason or another, usually it burns so much of its fissioning fuel that gravity takes over and shrinks it in quickly, and all this material comes together very quickly, and then it explodes in a massive explosion. And supernova can become brighter than the galaxies that they're located in. So here's where we observed it from Hervad Abbey, or Hervad Cloister. Here's what it looked like in 1680. Here's what it looks like today. And there's the instrument he used, his early sextant, mounted at the Abbey to observe the supernova of 1572. A sextant is just an instrument that spans a sixth of a circle, or 60 degrees. But with it, he made very accurate observations, and with his mathematical skills, he could tell that this was not an atmospheric phenomenon, but it was way distant, out in the realm of the stars. Here's a picture of it, a modern picture. This is a composite picture from the Chandra X-ray telescope in space, and from a infrared telescope in space, and from an observatory in Spain, Calar Alto, a visible optical image. So they combined those all together, and that's what the supernova looked like just a year or two ago. It's a long way from us. Here's Tycho's star chart of it. As we'll see, this chart is a very accurate depiction of the real sky near the supernova. The last sentence of the text below the chart says, the distance from the breast, Shedar, which is B, to the new star is 7 degrees 55 minutes of angular measurement. So I calculated it with our modern star charts, and the distance comes out to be, according to my calculations, 7 degrees 49.65 minutes. That's pretty close to 7:55. It's just over 1% of error for 400 and some years ago without a telescope. Pretty good. Tycho's supernova is in the modern day constellation of Cassiopeia. Well, it was Cassiopeia back then, too. In Greek mythology, Cassiopeia is the arrogant and vain queen of Ethiopia, wife of Cepheus and mother of Andromeda. Cassiopeia claimed that she and Andromeda were more beautiful than any of the sea nymphs, and this angered Poseidon. So Poseidon was figuring out what to do when an oracle told Cassiopeia the only way to save her kingdom of Ethiopia was to sacrifice Andromeda. So the story goes, she chained her to a shore rock for the sea monster to come and eat. But along came Perseus and saved Andromeda and married her. Poseidon then had Cassiopeia chained to her throne and placed her in the sky next to Andromeda. Some people call Cassiopeia today the chick in the chair. So here's a picture from a program that any of you can download for free, and you don't have to log in or anything. I went back in time to 1572 to November 11th from Hereford Abbey, and that's what it looked like. So you can see it's very, very close to what it looks like. This is Shedar. So look, I'm not a linguist. I didn't do very good in French in high school. I took 2 years of Latin, however. I don't remember any of the Latin, but I do remember what my teacher impressed on us. Don't get upset about Latin because there's so many words that are the same in English and Latin, or the roots are the same. You can figure out a lot of it without really knowing the language. Believe it or not, my high school Latin teacher is still alive. He lives up in Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island. He's in his mid-90s, but anyway. But I couldn't figure out what all this is. Now, Shedar, I know because that's a star in Cassiopeia that we're well known. I didn't know what Pectus was. When I lifted weights in high school, I knew that this muscle here was your pectoralis major, the breast. So anyway, but I couldn't figure out why he's calling these names to the other stars until Also in that program, Stellarium, I turned on the constellation art. And then I could translate all of that. It's misplaced a little bit, but you know, they do this by, you know, talking about, telling tales around the campfires about what's up in the sky. And so this is all oral, not measured, but you can translate it out. So A is supposed to be the head of Cassiopeia. That's not exactly right. But B is the breast. That's right on, isn't it? C is the belt or sash or waist. E is the knee. It's right on the knee. F's close to the foot. And I is the new star. So the artwork in that for free program broke the code of all that. Anyway, in 1575, King Frederick II of Denmark wanted Tycho back in Denmark to do his astronomy, so he made an offer that Tycho couldn't refuse. See, Tycho gained worldwide esteem as an astronomer from that book that he published on the supernova. So King Frederick gave him the entire island in the Danish Sound, the island of Ven, to be lord over. He could tax the people, and the king would also help pay for building Tycho an observatory. So Tycho designed and built the castle observatory surrounded by a fabulous garden. So now the expenditure that the king, Frederick II of Denmark, did for Tycho was about 5% of the wealth of the country.
Wow.
And that's more than we spend on our military, believe it or not. Anyway, this is also from that Stellarium program. You say, well, what's that? Well, I'll tell you what it is. I went to Uraniborg. I went back to 1576, August 8th, at sunrise. Because remember, Tycho was also an astrologer, so he cast a horoscope. When's the best time to start the building? That's when they had a big celebration on the island to lay the first foundation stone for his castle and observatory. So anyway, the elk. So he kept the pet elk. It made such a hit with the high society of Denmark that other nobles would borrow the elk for special occasions. Once people who borrowed the elk didn't watch them when they went inside for dinner, and the elk also came in. He made his way upstairs and found a vat that was brewing beer. Well, the elk drank so much beer that he fell down the stairs and I think broke his neck and died. So if you go Google Tycho Brahe, you'll see 20 different stories about the elk. You know, it's sensational. Some people call it a moose, some people call it a deer. I think it was an elk. Anyway, there's Uraniborg. Notice up top the golden weather vane, Pegasus, which is also a constellation. All of these cones and domes were housings for astronomical instruments that Tycho designed and made. And look, down here was this alchemy laboratory. That's where he tried to make gold, and more especially, that's where he whipped up all his different medicines. Here's another picture of it. Again, Pegasus way up top. I like that picture. It's probably closer, because it was made of brick. Probably closer to what it really looked like. Notice the flocks of birds in the background. You don't see that too often anymore. There's a picture of it, a drawing of it that was published in 1590 something. Now, that's not north up. I don't know why it's not, but it's not. This is a beautiful model of the building that is in the Science Museum in Munich. I haven't seen this, so I don't know how big it is, but what a detailed model. See, under those cones and domes and everything were astronomical instruments. And there's more there too, so it gives you an idea, but what a neat model. So there's what it looked like in 1598, that drawing that we saw, and what it looked like today, or in 2018. But again, I said that north was not up in the right-hand picture, and it's not. So to rotate it so north's up, now it matches the outline of the building better. For whatever reason, you have to rotate it 90 degrees to make north up. So the dimensions over here are in feet. But that's what Tycho designed. So, and you'll see this in a minute, the gardens inside here were vegetables and herbs, stuff to make his medicines with. And then on the outside was the orchards. No, that's not the right button, is it? Right. So here's a title page to his book, The Instruments for the Restoration of Astronomy, published in 1602, which is after he died. Tycho had written it. This was a second edition, so he dedicated this to his current patron, Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Empire, King of Hungary and Croatia, King of Bohemia, Archduke of Austria. I'd like to have all those titles. Why didn't you say King of the World, right? So, although this book was not paginated, I counted the pages, 102 pages after the title page, and Tycho's map of Venn up there with south up for whatever reason. I don't understand that. But if we zoom in on it, what I have highlighted over there translates to latitude above the equator, 55 degrees, 54.5 minutes. The actual latitude, using today's datum, the WGS 84, which is the datum that the GPS uses, is 54.4715 minutes. That's an incredible difference of less than 5/10,000ths of a degree for naked eye astronomy. Pretty good. 5/10,000ths of a degree. And in the center of that cross where Uraniborg was, here's the latitude, 55 degrees, 54, 30 seconds would be 54.5, so it's really, really close. There's a nice aerial shot of it today. This is after the restoration. In the early 90s, well, they started talking about this in the late 80s. In the early 90s, they got going on restoring as much. They realized right away they couldn't rebuild the building. So they didn't do that, but they wanted to restore the grounds. They did a good job of it. This thing here that looks like a church, well, it was a church until 2004 or thereabouts. And they said, hey, wait, we got 350 people on the island. We got another church. Let's turn this into a museum for Tycho. So they did. Brings more tourist dollars in, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so here was the outline of the building. And here were the herbs and vegetables, and then outside of that were the fruit orchards. Another thing I want you to notice, even though Tycho designed the building, and boy, if I won the lottery, I'd like to build a building that looked just like it. But what he found was it was no good for astronomy because the wind shook the instruments. It wasn't stable enough for his needs. So he built another observatory right here. And that's the restoration of it. That he called Stornberg.
Monty?
Yes.
What happened to the original building? What part of the demolished?
To build it, he conscripted the townsfolk, the islanders, and they built it. And so they weren't very happy about it because they'd been left alone for decades. Decades. No one had bothered them. They were free, they thought. But when Frederick gave Tycho the island, they had to go back to work for somebody else. So when Tycho fled, they quickly came and took it down. Anyway, here's what gardening looked like back in 1580 in Scandinavia. Some more. That's what they did. No power tools, not much noise. And here's here they call it Stella Bergum, but I've always heard of it as Sternborg. Anyway, that's what it looked like. The Roman numerals there tell you it was 1584, right? Roman numerals. And here's the restoration today. So, UNESCO and the IAU have designated Uraniborg and Stella Bergum as World Heritage Sites. Look down here. IAU Observatory Code, well, they don't have an observatory code, but you're right now sitting in IAU Observatory Code 932. So you're in a recognized observatory. So UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In collaboration with the IAU, the International Astronomical Union, has designated Uraniborg as a World Heritage Site. The United States withdrew from UNESCO in 2017. Since we're so great, we don't need no stinking education, science, or culture. Here's a page from Dreyer's anthology of Tycho's work. This was a cure for the plague that Tycho made. This Theria callus, that's sugar syrup. Tincture of sulfurous juniper. So what, juniper berries with sulfur? I don't know. So I do know this, Angelica, that's an absinthe. Angelica is a herb that is been used for medicine for centuries, and it still is. Some herbalists say it'll cure everything, from bad breath to baldness to you name it. If you got it, have Angelica. This is Sven Ingvar Anderson, who unfortunately passed away a little bit ago, he designed and was one of the main impetus to the Uraniborg reconstruction project of the early 1990s. He was especially involved in the gardens, and here he is in Uraniborg's gardens with a statue of Tycho looking up at the stars that was put in there in 1946. Here is what he did. Archaeobotany. They didn't just go plant any old things. First, they scoured all of Tycho's writings to figure out what was in the gardens and in the orchards. And then they backed it up with doing archaeology for botany to figure out what really was there. So in 1588, Tycho's patron, King Frederick II, died, and things started to change for Tycho. The prince was too young to become king, so a regency council took over until 1596, when King Christian IV was crowned. He is still the longest-serving king of Denmark. The new king was not nice to the nobility, and especially to Tycho. The next year, 1597, Tycho and his family left the island and Uraniborg before things became any worse. They took what instruments they could, some, took the whole family and a lot of his entourage and got on a boat. In 1599, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II in Prague gave Tycho the title of Imperial Court Astronomer. Tycho attended a royal banquet in Prague on October 13th, 1601. Good manners at the time said that the guests remained seated until the host, who was a prince, left the table. Well, Tycho apparently had been drinking quite a bit that evening, but the prince had not been. He was talking to a pretty girl. So Tycho stubbornly stayed seated, regardless of the pain of the need to relieve himself. Kepler, who was with him by then, joined him in 1600, said that Tycho's bladder burst and he died a very painful 11 days later at the age of 54. So can you imagine that? I can't imagine that. Yeah, it wouldn't be nice, would it? Anyway, this is Tycho's resting place, the Church of Mother of God before Time. It's in the old town part of Prague in the Czech Republic. Construction of this began in the 1300s and was finished in 1450s. I took that picture in 2009. Here's another picture of the church in the center in the background, and the square there. That day we left the conference a little bit early, and 4 or 5 of us went downtown to sightsee in Prague, and one of the guys was a Spaniard that had been there before the Velvet Revolution, when it was still controlled by Russia. And he said it's just like night and day, the difference. Look at these, all the people out there enjoying themselves on a nice day. This was in May 2009. He said back then there was hardly anyone ever on the streets. The shops were empty. It was just completely different under the way it was then.
What is that Salvatore Bauer there, written on the building?
Where? You've got better eyes than I do.
Behind the church, to the right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right there.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's I don't think Salvatore's buried there, but maybe they sell pictures,
A
or maybe,
museum or something?
yeah, it's just a tourist shop type thing, gift shop probably.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's a beautiful city.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
I mean, look at that church. They don't make them like that anymore, do they? Anyway, but now Tycho's body has been exhumed twice. Once in 1901, and again a year after I was there in 2010. Over the years, there have been many stories, all sorts of rumors about Tycho. One that would not go away was that he was murdered. Well, in 1901, the excuse for exhuming him was to see if he died of a kidney stone. But they didn't find any kidney stones, so no, that was no good. But then in 2010, they went in specifically to see if they could determine whether he was murdered or not. Specifically, the rumor was that Kepler croaked him, poisoned him, so he could get Tycho's data. Well, I can't imagine that. I cannot imagine that. Tycho was flamboyant and colorful and all that. Kepler was not. He was straight-laced and just wouldn't do anything like that. Anyway, they went in to see if he was murdered in 2010, and he was not. Here's the latest paper on it. Was he murdered or not? Part 2. Multi-element analysis of hair and bone samples from Tycho Brahe and his histopathology of his bones. I mean, they went in there with every kind of modern medical device you can think of, MRIs and CAT scans and you name it. But he wasn't poisoned. It looks more and more likely that Kepler's
Was it
bladder bursting was the cause of his death. I can't imagine anything like that. It's just so painful. But so yeah, he was a colorful guy, but he wasn't going to breach etiquette by getting up from the table. I'm glad we don't act that way these days. Anyway, so Tycho was the best observational astronomer in the world just before the telescope came into use. His model of the solar system was not correct. You know, Copernicus, 50 or 60 years before, had come out with the sun-centered system instead of the Earth-centered system. Kepler had an in-between system, but it was not right. But his observations were supremely accurate. They were so good that Kepler was able to formulate his 3 laws of planetary motion that we still use. They're laws of nature from Tycho's data. So he was a great mathematician, an author, an alchemist, an apothecary, an architect, and a landscape designer, and probably a dozen other things that I can't think of. Anyway, thank you for your attention, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have.